Alright, I wanted to make this video because there's a lot of... So what is this video actually about? This video is my understanding of what reality actually is. We're also going to be quickly touching on how your brain does not create your awareness, it actually receives your awareness. Before we get started, I want to say that this is not my theory. This theory has been around for a very, very, very long time. Early examples of this is this fella right here and this fella right here. Well, technically this guy just said that this guy's the smartest man on earth, but it counts. But if you want to go further back than that, we've got this dude all the way back here, which I'm pretty sure was also this dude and this dude. And they said this is their quote, and this is his quote as well, by the way, I forgot to add it.
While editing this video, I realized that this guy actually did say something about it. This is what he said.
But if you're looking for some more recent examples of people exploring this theory, we've got these people right here, and they've got some great YouTube videos. They're really, really good. They're really comprehensive. But the problem with it is they're kind of just boring as fuck.
When we get the meaning.
So first let's talk about zero dimensions. Now, unlike what a lot of people think, zero doesn't mean nothing. Zero dimensions is still a thing. It's just a point. It just bees. Alright? So now we move on to the first dimension. The first dimension is a straight line. Just like this. If you existed in the first dimension, like this little dot, you can move back and forward like this, across the line, but you can't ever leave the line. You're stuck to it. And anything you see will always be a dot. This guy, this little dot, will always perceive this guy as one of these. It will always perceive it as a dot. Even if this was very, very, very long and stretched out like that, this would still look like this, and this would still look like this. Why? Because there's no way for any light or anything to get around it, because it exists and it takes up 100% of the sideways space. So moving on to the next dimension, we've got the second dimension. Now the second dimension still has the exact same forward and back movement as the first dimension, but we can also move up and down, giving us access to this entire space. But also, a reoccurring theme here, an entity that exists in this dimension would always perceive another entity existing as a straight line. Even this word, for example, let's take this word and put it in. How would this dot perceive the word perceives? Again, it would just be a line. Not because of the highlight, because of the gaps between the letters. You see, when you lay something that looks very, very complicated from our point of view, from our three-dimensional point of view, down into a two-dimensional point of view, it just becomes a line. Even though there are gaps between the letters, that does not mean the line is dotted. It could be, if you approached it from the right angle, but it doesn't always mean there'll always be gaps. It's all just a matter of perspective. So when I ask what is this relative to what is this, both the word perceives or a straight line are valid. Very different answers, both are true. It's just a matter of perspective. So now moving on to the 3D world, which is this little box. We live in a 3D world. We can walk around. We can exist in every dimension. And we perceive two-dimensionally, one dimension prior. Reoccurring themes. Now you might be thinking in your head, what do you mean we perceive two-dimensionally? No, we don't. Well, look around you right now. Look around. Look around the room or wherever you happen to be. Everything that you ever see at any point will always fit onto a photograph. Everything you ever see will always fit inside of a photo. We do perceive the world two-dimensionally. Sure, we can walk up to something and move it around, but that's not true perception. That's not momentary perception. That's introducing a new concept. A concept that is highly, highly misunderstood. And that concept is the fourth dimension. Now, a lot of people think that time is the fourth dimension, but I've got a lot of problems with that. But before we dive too deep into it, if you were to look at these dimensions here, you'd notice something if you don't have fucking brain damage, is the fact that every dimension is built of an infinite amount of the dimension prior stacked up. What do I mean by that? Take 0 dimensions, and you just spam an infinite amount, stack them all up. What do you start to get? A straight line. It's the first dimension. Then you take the first dimension and you stack it up an infinite amount of times. What do you start to get? You start to get a plane. You start to get the second dimension. Then we take the second dimension and we stack it up a shit ton of times. And what do we get? We start to get 3 dimensions. So every dimension is created from or made up of an infinite amount of the dimensions prior, all stacked up. And that is where my problem with time starts. Because while it's true that we could perceive the world 3-dimensionally by getting up, walking around, say, picking up my coffee cup, looking around it, looking inside of it, I can see 3-dimensionally, I can perceive 3-dimensionally with the help of time. But is time really the next step? Because if we look at time, it seems to be very linear. We have a past, a present, and a future. This is a very linear straight line. Maybe time isn't the 4th dimension, but it might play a very important role. So let's just reassess. Is time an infinite amount of the 3rd dimension stacked up on top of each other? Technically, yes. Does existing in time give us the ability to perceive in a 3-dimensional way? Also, technically, yes, but there's a problem. Time is relative, and we assume time is linear, but we need to deep dive what time actually is. So we can start over here with the temporal. Big T for temporal, little t for time. That'll be important in the future. We'll come back to that. So, what have we got? We have the past, the present, and the future. And these have been labeled 1, 3, and 2. Now you might immediately think, these aren't linear. Exactly. They're not supposed to be linear. So let's start right at the beginning. Let's start with 0t. 0t is just awareness. Your awareness is the thing that moves through time. Time leaves everything behind. Something has to move through it. That is the awareness. So moving on to the first temporal dimension, we have the past, 1t. The past is set in stone. This is you right here. This is awesome. And everything behind you is your past. None of this can change. None of it can change. So moving on to the next one. The future. The future is actually the second temporal dimension, not the third. It is the second. Why? Well, as we see with the color coding of our arrows here, we have the past, which is, as we have established, linear. But then there is the future, where there's infinite possibility. Regardless of whether it's your near future, like tomorrow, or your more distant future, like in 10 years. Even though the overall variation between the possibilities is bigger the further into the future you go, that doesn't mean both aren't still infinites. In the same way that if you took the number 1 and then you took the number 3, there is an infinite amount of possibilities for decimal points between them. You take the same number 1, you put it up here, and then you put the number 9 down here, there is an infinite amount of decimal points between them too. Yes, 1 to 3 is smaller than 1 to 9, but both are infinite. Now, why is this only 2-dimensional if there's an infinite possibilities? Well, it's simple. Your future is directly dictated by your past. You will never be able to escape it, and every decision you make comes from it. You can't outrun the past. It's already happened. So therefore, that is binding you in a direction of movement. So this is only 2-dimensional. You are still bound by your past. And also, every future possibility will create a past. So moving through future is an infinite amount of pasts that just haven't happened yet. That is two-dimensional. They are infinitely stacked. So moving on to the third dimension of time now, you might be confused, but it is actually the present moment. Using the same logic we did before, we explored the limitations of your future due to your past. That creates a blockage of directional movement. So what's the solution? How do you get an infinite amount of both pasts and futures stacked up? Well, that's simple. That's taking every living organism, every leaf, every bacteria, every human, every dog, every animal, and stacking them all up so that all of their pasts and all of their futures intersect all at the exact same time. 3 dimensions of moving through time is just the ability to affect someone's future without ever acknowledging the past. You can only do that through interacting with other people. This overlap of decision, when two people have to make a decision, even though their pasts have never crossed, they've never touched, their futures do overlap. This overlapping of future choice becomes volume, and volume is 3D. So this volume is the third dimension of time. So what is the fourth dimension then? Is the fourth dimension more time? No. This is a completely new dimensional concept. The fourth dimension, alleged fourth dimension, is actually the first dimension of consciousness, and that is the wavelength of reality, the exact point where all the things that ever exist, everything that ever exists, meets all the pasts to ever exist and all of the futures to ever exist. The intersection between all of the dimensions of this temporal and all of the dimensions through space, that intersection is reality. So reality is not just linear dimensions like the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension, the sixth dimension. It's actually the relationship between all of the dimensions of space and all of the dimensions of time at the exact point they intersect, which is the present moment. That creates a new dimension. And what is that dimension? That is consciousness. It is the collision between time and space that creates the axis. Without awareness, time itself collapses, as with no point to move through time, no past can be pulled from, and no future could exist. That would immediately collapse the wave. Consciousness and conscious understanding is a prerequisite for reality to even exist in the first place. So no, your brain does not create your awareness and your identity. It just receives it. In the same way that if I got a FaceTime video call from Kendrick Lamar and he answers it, and then I pull out a gun and then just shoot my fucking phone, I didn't kill Kendrick Lamar. I destroyed the phone and I lost signal. Kendrick Lamar's still probably out in his garden praying to his trees or whatever the fuck Kendrick Lamar likes to do. I see you, Kendrick. I know you pray to trees, by the way. But your body is just the receiver to the awareness that already existed. And your experience has shaped a personality around what already was there. If I pulled out a gun and I shot you in the face, your body would die. Your soul just loses connection. Your awareness is just gone. It doesn't mean it's destroyed. So now we're moving on to the second dimension of consciousness, which is more than just the relationship between 3D and 3T. This is the relationship between 3D, 3T, with the ability to recognize patterns. Why is that important? Well, 2C is when you're the observer of the observer. The awareness that you're even self-aware and the advantages of it. 2C is the ability to look at yourself in the past, present, and future without any emotional bias. This enables you to spot reoccurring life patterns and track them back to the stored emotional frequency and process them in order to close the loop permanently. An example? I see a version of me that is stuck in a loop. and I see the version of me that observes the loop. I am not in the loop, I am just watching it. Now you might be thinking, okay, sure, this is self-aware, but how is this a new dimension? Well, the ability to identify your emotional triggers, trauma, and societal triggers as well, and just the relationship between how you interact in the world, gives you the ability to change your decisions from cause and effect, where you just react to your day, to start proactively creating your day. That literally shifts the fucking timeline that you are in. Every decision you make directly impacts the future. If you could make a decision based not on the present but on the future, you are actually manipulating your timeline in such a way that is multidimensional. You are changing your future before you get there. That is multidimensional. Most humans never achieve this. I'm willing to bet that 99% of all humans that have ever existed never even knew how to do this. So if you're listening to this and you think, yeah, I can do that, no, you can't. Nowhere near as good as you think you can. Grow up. The third and final dimension of C, which is not actually true, but the third dimension that we'll be talking about now is 3 dimensions of space, 3 dimensions of time, and every possibility all combined. The full coherence of all possible combinations of space, time, and consciousness. 3C is the understanding that none of it was ever separate, as all of it will always collapse into the same place. It all falls back into reality. So 3C would be the awareness of every living entity's past and every future they could ever possibly have, all in coherence with time and space. This is reserved solely for what a lot of people have misunderstood as God or spirituality. What it really is just the awareness that created the universe. You can call it whatever you want. I don't care. Now, in the next video, we'll be relating how it applies to you and breaking down into the dimensions of time, little t, and how different combinations of states of mind mixed with different combinations of awareness, thoughts, emotion, or movement can actually give you very, very, very predictable outcomes. If you want a sneak peek, here, take a screenshot of this and this.